Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
As we all know by now, India and China have decided to end the standoff, pretty much end the standoff that started 4.5 years ago in Ladakh. Mostly in eastern Ladakh, all along eastern Ladakh, but also going to some points deep south of Ladakh, almost reaching up to Himachal Pradesh. Now, as we talk about this, and we'll go into it in some detail, and at some point, Snehesh Alex Philip, our defense editor, will also join me to explain the new norms that have been decided between the two sides. I have to also underline to you the uncanny reality. The uncanny reality, or if you think uncanny is probably a little bit negative or suspicious or intriguing, let me say a sobering coincidence. You can also say glorious coincidence, because whatever the outcome of a war or a battle, there is a lot of sacrifice made, and your armies fight gloriously. So you can choose your own description, but today is 21st of October. Yesterday, 20th of October, was the 62nd anniversary of the formal start of the 1962 India-China war, or what we see as the Chinese invasion of India, because China started that war without a doubt. 21st October, when I record this, is also the National Police Memorial Day. Now, National Police Memorial Day is also linked to India-China border in the same geography. Although this happened 3 years earlier. On 21st of October 1959, a patrol of the CRPF, what was then called, in that unit was called Indo-Tibetan Border Force, they had been sent out in the hot spring area to basically to check out the ground and to establish their presence, because that was the era of the forward policy. Both sides were checking out, moving their troops ahead to see who owned which real estate. And that is when they got surrounded by Chinese soldiers, a much larger body of Chinese soldiers. 10 were killed, many were taken prisoner, and the squad commander who was taken prisoner later came and also described, as he wrote his description, said that they were also made to carry some Chinese bodies, which means some Chinese also died in that skirmish. Now that is observed as the National Police Memorial Day. So our tributes to all of the Indian policemen and women from all forces, CRPF and all other forces, who've sacrificed their lives over this 65-year period. In fact, if you want to read more about it, as I had mentioned to you in a much earlier episode of Cut the Clutter, please check out this article by IPS officer Akash Jindal in the Indian Police Journal. Now, that said, let's first of all look at the politics of what has happened, and then we'll take you to the ground and see what does it mean and what does it lead to, and what are the new norms that Snehesh Alex Philip will join me and explain to us. So first of all, the politics. Now, just check the timings. I keep saying, I've said this to you again and again, that in my business, that is journalism, we follow the 3 example rule, which means if you find 3 examples of something, usually you will draw a straight line between the 3. That means 3 is a straight line. That confirms a hypothesis. Now, the hypothesis in this case, let me tell you the 3 points. There are 3 examples. The first example is that the big standoff that India and China had in Doklam region, abutting Sikkim, between Sikkim and Bhutan, that started in 2017. That ended on 29th of August 2017, almost dramatically. Back channel talks were going on, but it ended almost dramatically. What's the important thing to note? Just a few days after, that is from 3rd to the 5th, was the BRICS Summit. That edition of BRICS Summit was taking place in Xiamen in China. So on the eve of the BRICS Summit. Then we come to 2022. That was the next big, there was one in the middle that I'll tell you about. But the next major resolution between India and China. That was in the Gogra Hot Springs area. You heard a lot about it. We also recorded a full episode of Cut the Clutter on this, of which also I'll share a link with you. Please see that. Now, this came on 9th of September 2022. Again, the timing, the resolution came or disengagement came on 9th of September 2022. On 15th and 16th of September, the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit was taking place in Samarkand in 2022. Famously, that's where Minister Modi made his oft-quoted remark, this is not the era of war. That said, come to our third example, because we said three example rule. So what's happened? Watch what's happened just now. Just today, on the eve of the BRICS Summit in Kazan in Russia, once again, India and China have made this resolution. So this tells you that when the two principals are about to meet, that is Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, until then, his back channel stuff goes on, and then this is not just a question of आंख की शर्म, right? It's in geostrategic affairs, nobody has आंख की शर्म. Everybody is बेशरम. So it's not as if Xi Jinping is awkward to face Narendra Modi now that अरे बाबा मैं उसकी ज़मीन पे बैठा हूँ or I'm not letting him come to his own area. How will it look? No, it's not like that. It is that two big powers keep negotiating all the time, and then they choose their occasion to announce a resolution. So this is as good a moment as any. That's how three of these resolutions have come, major resolutions have come, timed with these summits. One with Shanghai Cooperation Organization and two with BRICS summits, and this has happened over 7 years, 2017, Doklam, and now 2024. I told you there was another one in the middle, and that was on 16 February 2021. That's when disengagement came in the Pangong Lake and Kailash Range area. That's a little bit different. I can't find a link there to one of these summits, but that's a little bit different because that's where India had taken advantage by going up to Kailash Range, and both sides had taken their armor also. Now, in the entire Ladakh sector, you can take a tank here and tank there, but really the tank territory or tank terrain in any sizable width or length is available only in two areas. One in the north in what is called as the Depsang Bulge on the Indian side or Depsang Plains on the Chinese controlled side, and the second in the Kailash Range area. Now, these are the areas where if tanks are taken by both sides, it becomes a very fraught situation. India had gone up there. It was a very adventurous and very audacious move in August the previous year in 2020, shortly after what had happened in Galwan and also skirmishes in Pangong area. And the Chinese had brought their tanks in. These tanks were standing almost barrel to barrel, and that's where the two sides figured that they had something to exchange. And India also had a bargaining leverage. And that's when India decided to agree to disengage there. The Chinese also disengaged. The tanks on both sides came back, and both sides figured out a modus vivendi. Now, modus vivendi in these cases was a little bit different from what it's going to be now. The modus vivendi then in all these cases was that look, you used to go to, I'm talking of Ladakh now, not Doklam, that you used to go to these areas to patrol. We used to come to these areas to patrol. You don't come to these areas. We don't come to these areas. The areas where you perceived was your line of control, line of actual control, and where we perceived was our line of actual control, which either side is not disputing. We will declare these as buffer zones. Buffer zones means कोई नहीं जाएगा, कोई नहीं जाएगा, कोई नहीं आएगा. If nobody comes, nobody will be stopped. कोई जाएगा नहीं तो कोई रोकेगा नहीं तो लड़ाई नहीं होगी. And if nobody is there, if there is no confrontation, one patrol doesn't stop the other, then the opportunity to break into fisticuffs or using other weapons will not take place, and that's how a distance was created between the two sides. That is how all of these resolutions were arrived at, and this also applied to the Galwan region, which also got resolved first because that's where that bloody skirmish taking lives had taken place. Now, this said, two vital areas were still missing. One was Depsang. Now, Depsang, you go right up north. Right up north, then look to the west of Daulat Beg Oldi. Daulat Beg Oldi is an old, small airstrip. It used to be a heliport, but now it's an airstrip. You can land C-130s there quite comfortably. You can also land some other aircraft there now because it's been improved. It's also India's last post, sort of, so to speak, in the north. As you go up north along Shok River, Ladakh, please see the map. This is just 8 kilometers short of Karakoram Pass. Now, the Chinese are very sensitive about that area, not because their highway is passing through Karakoram Pass, their highway actually is passing through Khunjara Pass later, although we don't know what they might do with Karakoram going ahead. But this is a sensitive area for them because this is much too close to their Xinjiang mainland. So this is the area where Chinese in 1962, they had pretty much taken most of the Depsang plains. That was in their claim line. Whereas what remained with India was the Depsang Bulge. Depsang Bulge is nearly 970 square kilometers. Now, India did not have any troops positioned there, but India regularly patrolled that area. Now, that area is not easy. If you see that area, it doesn't have many valleys, mountains, peaks. It is a fairly flat area. It's really a mountain desert or a mountain plateau at altitudes ranging between 16 to 17,000 feet. However, because it's flat land, this is a wide tankable terrain. So the Chinese can bring tanks from their side, which is much easier because their side is flatter, high but flat, much better connected. India can bring its tanks, but it will be very difficult to pile up that kind of tank force there because all of it has to go through one road along Shok River, which is in fact mostly within the range of Chinese light artillery as well. So the Chinese might see it as an area of opportunity in case of a real war. India may see it also as an area of opportunity. You never know because if India can push in enough armor from there and get a breakthrough, India can cut the Chinese highway there, G219, which is the Gilgit Xinjiang highway, and this which started the trouble in mid-50s. However, these are theoretical things. What had happened was that India used to patrol to certain points in this area. Those are patrolling points 10, 11, 11A, 12, 12A, and 13. India's access to those patrolling points had been barred. The Chinese, on the other hand, would claim that their territory or their perception of LAC stopped just 1.5 kilometers short of a place called Birdsey. See on the map now, Birdsey is where ITBP has a very large camp. I think battalion headquarters or more. These things keep changing, but a sizable camp. In 2013, the Chinese had come within a kilometer and a half or 2 kilometers, in fact, very close to Birdsey. And that led to a lot of negotiations and give and take, etc., etc. Finally, they pulled back. Going generally west from Birdsey, Indian patrols would go to patrolling points 10 to 13, that is 10, 11, 11A, 12, 12A, 13. The key thing is that just after Birdsey, not far from there, is an area which is literally called bottleneck. It's so narrow that no vehicle can pass there. Now, the Chinese get their patrols. Even if patrols don't come in, they have surveillance. Or maybe they park a vehicle because they built a road right up to their area of control. And that can give warnings, or they have surveillance equipment or sensing equipment that can give warnings to their patrols that an Indian patrols coming in, and they come and stop. They started stopping Indian patrols at Bottleneck. After Bottleneck comes an area called Y Junction. That's because that path forks into two. One goes towards patrolling point 10, that's on the northern end, and the other patrolling point 13, that is sort of south of there. That goes up to generally to the Galwan area, and then it continues. So that has been the big trouble spot, and that is where a lot of the critics of the government have said that India has lost 1,000 kilometers of territory, 970 kilometers. What is 30 square kilometers between front and foe in terrain like that? But 970 kilometers, and the allegation has been that India has lost that territory. So the truth, India never lost that territory. It's just that India's access to that territory for patrolling had been stopped. Similarly, China's access to patrolling in some of these areas which they consider as theirs according to their idea of the LAC, that had been stopped as well. That has now been resolved. India can now patrol to these patrolling points. Now, the other contentious point is way down south. That is very far south. In fact, it is 560 kilometers south of Daulat Beg Oldi. Daulat Beg Oldi, I told you, is the northernmost point. It's also called SSN. Indian Army has traditionally called it SSN, subsector north. But when you come south, come, 560 kilometers, it'll take you a lot of time reaching there in that terrain. Then you come to a place called Demchok. Now, Demchok is again an area where the Chinese claim line and the Indian claim line vary by about 3 kilometers. Now, it's a slightly complicated thing, as everything is in these parts, because the British maps showed Demchok village, say, let me just say, at one point along a Nala called the Charding Nala. The Indian maps, 1947 onwards, showed this as west of Charding Nala. West is towards Tibet. That's an easy way of understanding this. 3 kilometers to the west of Charding Nala. And that's where India believes that their line of actual control lies. Chinese don't accept it, and that's why this is an area of frequent dhakamuki, of frequent, if not fisticuffs, but frequent tension. What the Chinese had done lately was to cross Charding Nala and pitch tent, literally pitch a tent at the spot where they think their claim is. Now they have removed that tent. And it looks like both sides can now patrol. Once again, Snehesh will explain to us how this patrolling will take place. So, Indian side can patrol along Kharding Nala. Indian side can patrol up to India's own claimed Demchok village. In fact, there are two Demchok villages in the same area. It's just that the Chinese spell theirs with two Qs. So, ours is DEMCHOK, China's is DEMQOQ. Now, India can go to its own side of Demchok. This also solves some problems that our graziers have had in this area, because this is a little bit of a flat area. However, this is not an easy terrain either. Demchok itself is 13,800 feet. And if you go up, in fact, if you go south from there, but up as in altitude, you have to reach to 16,960 feet or 570 meters. And this is almost a mountaineering kind of patrol. And that's where in the past long range patrols have been carried out by the Indian side. The Chinese come from their side. They leave their souvenirs, packets of cigarettes, a little paint or something to say we've been here. That is a pass called Charding Pass or Charding La. It is from that spot, in fact, that it is said that you can get a full, clear, glorious view of Mansarovar Lake. I told you this brings you almost close to that part of the border where Himachal Pradesh begins. Now, whether India can go up there or not, we'll see. But the fact is, in all these areas now, as in the areas where disengagement had taken place earlier, patrolling has now opened up subject to the new norms. Those new norms we'll just tell you about. And now to explain the implications of these new rules and how different this new arrangement is compared to what was arrived at in the previous disengagements, say in Gogra, Hot Springs, Pangong, Galwan, Kailash Range, etc., we have Snehesh Alex Philip joining. Snehesh, I know that this means a little less anticipation of action than used to be the case until today, but overall this is good news.
Well, there is no doubt about the fact that this is good news, because this development is coming after 4.5 years of tense standoff. And the best news is that this news is coming just ahead of the winters. And the winters in this region is really hard. It's actually very killing because the temperatures in areas drop down from minus 30 degrees to over minus 50 degrees Celsius. So this was something where you never had any men or equipment posted before 2020, but since 2020, every winter there have been people who've been deployed there.
Yeah. So what exactly will happen now, and how is this arrangement different from what happened earlier with Gogra, Hot Springs, Kalwan, Pangong, Kailash Range?
The difference being that now we're not fully the government has not said anything officially besides the fact that both sides have agreed for disengagement and restarting of patrolling. Now, what happened in the earlier disengagements that have taken place, these were the friction points that were created in 2020. The points that you mentioned was that there was disengagement with the troops from both sides who were literally face to face. I would not say face to face, but literally face to face. They pulled back at an agreed distance of, let's say, anywhere between 1.5 kilometers to 2.5 kilometers. So it's the distance varied from area to area, from where they were, right? And the area between them were declared as buffer zones. Now, one way of saying is that both have gone back. The other way is saying that because the Chinese had intruded into India dominated territory, I would not say India held territory, India dominated territory. So the gap is there more on buffer zone is more on the Indian side.
More at our cost.
More at India's cost. Now the buffer zone means that nobody goes to patrol here. So this was a way to keep the troops away from each other. Now what has happened is that in the Depsang plains and in Demchok, they have agreed to go back. Whereas you were earlier mentioning, the Chinese troops stopped Indian soldiers at this area called Bottleneck, right? So now they have agreed to go back to their pre-2020 positions, but at the same time, they have also now restarted patrolling. So which means that areas where large number of patrolling points where India was not able to go since 2020, India would now be able to undertake these patrols.
So both sides can go to their perceived points on the LAC now.
So both sides can go not to the perceived points, but they can go to to the patrolling areas where they went, let's say in May 2019.
Yeah, but stop about 200 meters short.
But 200 meters short. While, for example, like you were mentioning about the Depsang side itself, as far as the Chinese are concerned, their perceived LAC comes down to Birdsey, right? It's just about 1.5 kilometers from a major Indian military camp there. Now, they never do come there. So there's a mutually agreed. This is something which is on a very ground level situation where they allow them to come and where they are stopped. Now, the interesting part is that there is a new protocol also, patrolling protocols also now that have been introduced. The copy has just been updated. These were information that just came in a few minutes back. As per the new patrolling protocols, both sides will undertake the frequency has been limited to twice a month, right? So which
to
means
each of these points.
To each of wherever the patrolling points are there.
Twice a month.
You can go twice a month. So Indians can go twice a month and the Chinese can go twice a month, which means that they would do alternate week, right? As per the new patrolling protocols, each side will have to inform the other that they are going to undertake this patrol so that there is no clash. The idea is to avoid any clashes. So each time India, let's say, goes to since we're discussing Depsang here, let's go to Depsang from Bottleneck.
PP10.
Bottleneck, they will move down to Y Junction. From Y Junction, they'll go to PP10, PP12 and 13. They will inform the Chinese that we are going to undertake this patrol. So similarly, let's say for the Chinese, if they want to patrol, let's say in the Galwan area, and they want to come down to the PP14 area, which was a buffer zone, the Chinese will inform the Indians first, saying that we are going to undertake this patrol. Now they've also restricted the total number of personnel in a patrol to 14 people.
The size is only 14.
Size is only 14.
That's one cricket team and 3 extras.
One cricket team and 3 extras.
One cricket team, 2 umpires and a third umpire.
Oh well, there you go. Right. So usually patrols are around the same strength itself earlier also, but then there were times when you undertake a bigger patrol, and that is where the clashes and all used to happen, as you would have seen on multiple videos that have come out of clashes even before 2020. So the aim is now to restrict the frequency of those patrols, informing the other that we are going to undertake the patrol, and then restricting the total number of personnel that are there. I did try to find out whether they would be these under the protocols, they would be able to carry weapons, as in I'm talking about assault rifles, but I haven't got a confirmation on that yet. So earlier also, in earlier patrols also, they used to carry weapons on the back, but it used to be, yeah,
Upside down.
it used to be upside down. It doesn't really take much for.
I know.
Yeah,
but that was symbolic.
That was a symbolic thing, but they carried weapons. So I'm not really sure that whether it's the same protocol that is being followed. I've tried to check. Once I get the confirmation, we'll update that.
Now, for clarity, does this mean that the other areas, Kogra, Hot Springs, Kalwan, Pangong, Kailash Range, where earlier buffer zones had been set up, those buffer zones will not need to exist because each side can go to their perceived lines of patrolling?
See, but again, so the buffer zones no longer exist as it existed earlier.
Right.
But then for someone could always turn around and say, but hey, but these are continue to be buffer zones because are allowed only twice into that zone.
Right.
So it all depends on how one looks at this whole issue. But the fact is that earlier you were not allowed to enter those buffer zones. Now you can enter the buffer zones, but you have to inform the other.
But in any case, you were not sitting there. You were only patrolling there.
And that's the reason why I use the term India dominated areas rather than India controlled areas.
That's right. So once again, first of all, just with facts, Chinese came and gave India a lot of trouble. The expression I've used is that for 4.5 years they came and sat on dharna there, right? And they were not moving, and it was problematic to evict them by force. But they also realized that Indians were also there in strength.
Yeah.
And in the course of time, we built even strength. I think about, I don't want to mention a precise number, but for let's just round it off and say about 10 regiments of Indian tanks and armor have been taken there, right?
Well, I just was in Ladakh, Eastern Ladakh last month. We've done multiple videos from there. Do watch our YouTube channel for it. But I can tell you, the fact is that no matter how much that we've shown, the kind of development that is there, infrastructure building in terms of roads and also in terms of military infrastructure is just amazing. So more than half of the things I've not spoken about or mentioned in the videos for obvious reasons, but it's just amazing.
Yeah, and the Chinese also figured that there was no way they were going to move any distance forward because their objective is really their 1959 claim line, which they keep pushing at. So if you add it all up, this is good progress. In fact, I will tell you a couple more fascinating things because this is such an interesting zone. Come to Demchok, that is 560 kilometers south of DBO, Daulat Beg Oldi. Demchok is where Aksai Chin is at its narrowest. It's at its narrowest. That highway is going past it. It's at its narrowest, and that's why Chinese are also very concerned about this. The other thing is, just for those who are fascinated by geography, this is where Indus River enters Indian controlled territory. I'm not saying India because Aksai Chin is also India as far as I'm concerned. I believe in the map of my country. But this is where River Indus enters the Indian controlled territory. And this is where Charding Nala, that's where the dispute is. In fact, Charding Nala also breaks into two. And as the two branches go into the Indus River, it makes a little bit of flat land in the middle, like a little delta. And that is where the village location is. And that's what creates trouble, this side or that. But it's fascinating that this meets the Indus, then Indus comes into Indian territory and then carries on to Ladakh and then onwards into Pakistan, occupied Kashmir. Now, one more question finally, Snehesh. We know that right now you've got your rights, you got your rules, right? Rule book is there. You tell the other guy, I'm coming, you stay away. I'm only this many people. All that we understand. But does it mean a larger disengagement of big bodies of troops and equipment, heavy equipment?
So the larger disengagement is not going to take place so soon. Right now, because of the winters, there would be a disengagement well, the government would call it disengagement. This is the pullback of troops during winters, which is the norm. Now, what I've gathered so far is the fact that these decisions, this implementation, is to set the stage for the larger, most probably Modi, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping's bilateral talks in Russia. And post that is when there would be actual discussion. So one of the protocols agreed is that every on a monthly basis, the commanding officers of multiple units as well as the brigade commanders would keep meeting regularly.
Their counterparts.
Their counterparts would meet meeting regularly.
This is in fact a whole set of CBMs, confidence
Yeah.
building measures.
Yeah.
So each side knows what the other is doing. Now, a couple of things. First of all, we've explained this many times before, but Arun Shori taught us the power of repetition. You always said never underestimate the power of repetition. There is a difference between disengagement and de-escalation. Disengagement is what's happening now. That is, troops were here, they were taken here, and now they'll be taken here. De-escalation, on the other hand, is troops going home to their home bases. These
Yeah, to the
tanks,
barracks.
heavy units, the artillery going back to their home bases. That means you've de-escalated. You are not fearing that a war may break out anytime soon. So we are some distance away from de-escalation.
I think we are quite a distance away from de-escalation, but because on the Chinese side, the amount of infrastructure that has been built, and those are permanent infrastructure. For example, there's a new village coming up right next to in Pangong, so on the northern banks of Pangong, on the Chinese side.
Shakongs, as the Chinese call them.
And so and plus India development is also there. I still remember this. The fact is that so much has been pumped into this territory. I'm not really sure whether larger de-escalation would happen very soon.
Now, that is something that we need to watch out for. Meanwhile, also, we should speak the truth and try and separate it from politics. So there's one side that's been saying that thousands of square kilometers of land the Chinese have taken and India has conceded to the Chinese. The other side is saying nothing has been lost or compromised. The fact, however, is, and it's now very clear with this settlement, that one, the first side was wrong. No territory was taken from India. No territory was taken. However, if the second side, the other side said that nothing was compromised, that's also wrong, because India was denied access to a lot of territory to which it had access.
Yeah.
That access has now been restored.
Yeah.
To both sides, to whatever they perceived as their line of actual control, to that extent, minus the de-escalation. To that extent, shall we call it a return to status quo ante?
It is actually a return to status quo ante.
So
you're right.
So that is something to feel good about.
Absolutely.
So once again, when you watch de-escalation, keep an eye on what other summits are coming up where Modi and Xi Jinping have to run into each other.